They're the structures of a community, a welcome refuge from the outside world. They have distinctive styles and trends. They're our houses, they're our homes, and they're built in West Allis. From 1900 to 1980, there were distinctive housing eras. And throughout West Allis, it's easy to see the progression of those eras and how the events of the time had an impact on the designs of the houses. Shannon Honl, a graduate of UWM and an architectural historian, did her master's thesis on the various types of housing styles. She'll be our tour guide, so to speak, as we look at the designs and styles of houses built in West Allis. But first, let's see how Shannon got interested in the architecture of West Allis.
Well, it started with, I'm a history buff. I like anything history, and I knew I wanted to do architecture, and what drew me to architecture was the history of it. The stories the buildings tell. You go over to Europe, and sometimes it takes thousands of years to construct buildings, and each time you add a little, it tells a different story. And so here in West Allis, there's the story of workers' class housing and how that evolved. There was a housing boom here like almost no other in the nation, and so it was very interesting from that standpoint to sort of slice through the eras of housing development and learn the construction techniques and why people did the things they did and what drove the decisions and traditions in building.
All houses built need a plan, and materials needed to be supplied. Shannon explains the importance of the Wilbur Lumber Company on the early roots of building in West Allis.
Wilbur Lumber Company began in actually Burlington, Wisconsin, about 1895, and then at the turn of the century they moved into West Allis. And so they were not only a lumber yard where builders and homeowners could go for their lumber and supplies, they offered hardware, and the key thing is they offered sets of pre-designed homes. So if you were a landowner looking to build, you could go essentially through a catalog and pick out what kind of a home you might like to have. You could do like a mail order catalog, Sears, Roebuck, and others around the nation. If you were to go through Wilbur, you'd go to the store and hire a builder, and they would find the supplies necessary for your home. But it was like a kit of parts, essentially. In many ways, a modern day Menards or Lowe's, you just one-stop shopping. In addition, you could customize your home. That was additional fee in usually upper middle class houses. But there are over 200 or 300 Wilbur lumber designs, many of which I'm sure got built here in West Allis. And some of those customized homes we were able to locate within neighborhoods. And these designs, they were highly crafted in just beautiful drawings from trained architects and draftsmen. The majority of those were bungalows. Some of them were duplexes or two flats, like you see in the earlier part of the city. Some of them, the customized ones, of course, don't really fit into a type necessarily, because people could pick and choose, what parts they wanted.
Shannon gives us a blueprint for the three main eras of architectural design that can be found in West Allis.
So there's three main eras of housing development in West Allis. And for my research purposes, I primarily looked at everyday houses, not high style, not Victorian, just what everyday workers, middle class people were living in. And it really began in 1900, right before city incorporation, when much of the industry was moving here to West Allis, bringing an influx of people, jobs, residents. And so from 1900 to about 1935 is the bungalow era. And this was West Allis's largest housing boom ever. More houses were built prior to the 1929 stock market crash than ever will be built after that. So then the eras overlap a little. Taste and style and building traditions don't just change overnight. So from the bungalow era, we go into the Cape era. and that's about 1920 to 1960. And then finally following that up is the ranch era from about 1950 to 1980. So in the beginning, when manufacturing industry came to West Allis, it brought an influx of people, a lot of European immigrants. And this was the American dream, to come here and own a home and land and have a private single-family residence for your family. And so there were a couple ways to achieve that. Some would put a small down payment on a lot and to a real estate company. And as they worked, they would make payments towards it, and when finally paid off, then they could put the building on it. Other times, real estate developers would come through and they'd develop entire subdivisions, and they'd plot it out, and they'd put buildings already on it, maybe even Wilbur buildings, and so you could come right in and buy the land and the house already together. Planning was different then. You noticed the street fabric it's much more rigid, east-west and north-south, and smaller blocks of the same size in the older part of the community. And as you progress to the southwest from the northeast, not only are you following the trends in these eras, so you move from bungalow era to Cape era, out to ranch era, you're also getting a difference in lot size. Lot size is changing for house, for car, for garage. You lose the alley. Streets become curvy. Things like that change.
Shannon explains why the floor plan is so important in categorizing the style of a house.
Well, there's really two ways to look at all house types, including bungalows. And the first would be from the exterior. That's what most people consider first. And so when you conjure a bungalow image, people think of, full width porches, deep set porches, low roof lines, exposed rafter tails, the jerkin head clipped gable on many of them seen here in West Allis. The other way to think of houses and typologies is based on plan, which is my primary source for grouping them in certain categories. Bungalow has a very distinct plan. All of them share it. So even though houses look slightly different on the outside, they may not all have that jerkin head, clipped gable, they will all share a standard bungalow plan. And that plan is divided public spaces and private spaces, one on either side. Public spaces are a progression of living room, dining room, kitchen, and you often enter into the living room of a house. Private spaces, bedroom, bathroom, bedroom sequence, going to the depth of the house. So there's an entrance in the front and there's an entrance in the back, and to the bedroom and bathroom combination is a small, discrete hallway, usually off the kitchen, sometimes off the dining room. And this stays very consistent through every bungalow house type.
Shannon will now share with us a brief history of the bungalow and its popularity throughout the United States.
Bungalows originated, the term bungalow, I believe in India, is kind of a hut. And they really took off on the West Coast in California, an arts and crafts movement, sort of a rejection of industrialism and the machine into something that was more high-crafted, but yet affordable to a middle-class person. And so these, bungalows were built on the West Coast and then modified so that they could be mass-produced, that production could be standardized, door openings and lumber sizes and things like that. And there are numerous bungalow neighborhoods across the nation. They're very popular working class housing through the 1920s and 1930s. Often on the opposite side of the living room were two little stained glass windows, or a large stained glass window up above. You couldn't see out of it, but it filtered light through. Then often people would put their piano under there. No one had television, and pianos were a big form of entertainment. And even today, you can't buy the quality of lumber that you could in the 1920s. So, if you were going to start with a really good house, you have to buy an old one.
Shannon, what are the different types of bungalows?
So there are four major bungalow house types. The first one is very transitional. It's the earliest, happening early in the 1900s, and I call it a box bungalow or a bungalow cottage. And this is 2 rooms wide and 2 rooms deep. So it's the smallest version, and it's really transitioning from maybe a worker's cottage or the Polish flat at the beginning of the century. Then the second type of bungalow is a standard bungalow. And this is what the majority of bungalows are in West Allis. And this has that standard bungalow plan like I just talked about, with the division of public and private spaces. In addition to the standard bungalow, there's a subtype of that, the sun porch bungalow. And again, sharing that same standard plan, but in addition to that is a half-width enclosed, fully enclosed porch off the front of these houses. And I've called these West Allis sun porch bungalows. They appear here in West Allis in higher numbers than they do anywhere else in the Milwaukee area. And originally it was thought maybe these were added on later or filled in, and I do not believe that's the case. Wilbur Lumber plans show sun porches on their plans, and so I think they were built originally with houses as sort of an interesting entry sequence and an expansion of that living room space. So the third type is a side gable bungalow, otherwise known as a wide bungalow. And instead of being deep into the lot, they are wider than they are deep. And the gable runs parallel to the road, unlike standard bungalows where the gable runs perpendicular to the road. And the biggest difference in these is that the division between public and private spaces is now on floors. The first floor is entirely public space, living, dining, and kitchen, with a stair usually in the front. And then upstairs are the private spaces. And these were a little bit more upper middle class with that extra division of privacy. The final type of bungalow is a craftsman bungalow. This is less than 1% in the city. These are high-style bungalows, often architect designed, still sharing standard bungalow plan, but often adding an extra room, an extra bedroom in the back, maybe being 5 rooms deep, or extra bathrooms upstairs.
Falling into the bungalow era are duplexes. Shannon, what can you tell us about duplexes here in West Allis?
There are several types of duplexes. They're mostly in the northeastern corner, primarily for workers in the industrial area. They often share the same standard bungalow plan, but they're into a different category of housing because they're for multifamily or 2-family. There are 4 types of duplexes seen in West Allis, otherwise known as maybe 2 flats. The first is a double door type. So standard bungalow plan on both flats, top and bottom, and shared entry in the back and separate entrances in the front, usually adjacent on the same side of the house. The second type is very similar to that, again sharing that same floor plan, but the 2 private entrances are on opposite sides of the front porch, offering even a higher level of privacy for residents. The third type of duplex is the back entry type. The smallest duplex here in West Allis, 2 rooms deep and 2 rooms wide. And the back entrance was the only entrance to the top level, so that was shared. It was even a lower level of privacy. Often that upper tenant couldn't afford maybe a private entrance duplex, and so this might have been maybe a little lower class residency. The fourth type of duplex is a bungalow duplex, and these were very similar to single-family bungalow homes originally built as duplexes. So they're only 1.5 stories tall, unlike the other flats that were 2.5. These duplexes had standard bungalow plan on the bottom, but that second floor had to accommodate for roof pitch. And so with dormer additions and things like that, you could get maybe 2 bedrooms out of that upper level. Often they were 1-bedroom units.
The next major era in architectural styles to emerge is the Cape. Shannon gives us a general overview of what defines the Cape era.
Within Cape era, so that's about 1920 to 1960, there are two phases of development. The first, taking place chronologically prior to the other one, is the period revival, and the second is minimal traditional. And period revival referring to a revival of past styles, so Tudor revival, colonial revival on the exterior of houses, a little bit older houses, usually middle to upper middle class homes finished in more expensive exteriors such as brick and things like that. Concentrating in the historic districts here in West Allis, Juneau Highlands and Mitchell Manor, and a few in the north of Greenfield on South 72nd or so is an area of the Better Housing Bureau. Happened in the 30s. You could buy a lot from the city and they would provide you with a house plan. And so a lot of these look like period revival as well.
Shannon, can you tell us about the traditional Cape? Does it have any subtypes?
So there are three different types of houses falling into the period revival phase of the Cape era. So the first one's a traditional Cape, and these are much boxier in plan than the bungalows we discussed earlier. They're a little wider than they are deep, and there's still a division between public spaces and private spaces. These houses are mostly square in plan, 2 rooms wide and 2 rooms deep, and very symmetrical from the exterior. Central entrance ways, 2 usually small dormers with windows looking out from the second story, and the window and door openings have very classical detail and ornamentation to them. So the subtype of the traditional Cape is a storybook or picturesque Cape. And again, sharing that identical floor plan, the exterior is really what differs. A little more asymmetrical, sort of a bricked-in enclosed entranceway with a steep cat slide roof and a very dominant chimney out in front of it. The second type is a 2-story center hall colonial, and this is a full 2-story house now. Capes are usually 1.5 story. So this second type, full 2 stories, center stair and center hall, and then the public rooms surrounding it, usually living room dominating one side, and bedrooms and bathroom on the upstairs level. A subtype of this a little later on is a narrower version of this. This is only 1 room deep, and there's a small, very small percentage of these found north of Greenfield Avenue on 103rd and 102nd, and it may be possible that these were an executive neighborhood for possibly Alice Chalmers. They are all very identical. What's different about these is they now attach the garage to the house for the very first time. The third type is considered a 2-story side hall colonial, or maybe more commonly known as a garrison house, a garrison colonial, or Mickelson colonial is another term used. People who own them may be commonly referred to them as Mickeys, and they are asymmetrical on the outside. You enter in the side of the building into the living room, and the stairway is right there on the side. So the living room is followed by dining room and kitchen, and then all the private spaces are upstairs. A very distinct characteristic to identify this house is the second story overhangs the first story slightly.
Other Cape categories include minimal traditional, side gabled, and front gabled. Shannon offers a brief description of each of these styles.
The minimal traditional is the second phase of the Cape era, ranging from 1940 to 1960. And these houses may be considered World War II era. There was a shortage of housing as veterans returned from World War II, buying up lots and needing houses immediately. So these houses are very different in exterior appearance. Prefabricated elements, we haven't seen those before. Vinyl siding and standardized windows and things like this. There are 3 types of houses within the minimal traditional phase. The first being a minimal traditional Cape. And so very similar to the period revival, but but looking more prefabricated. And this was really the toughest house type I had to tackle. I discovered there are about 6 different floor plans for the same exterior shell of this. So through my research, I began to think that maybe they were builder specific or neighborhood specific, certain floor plans for certain neighborhoods, or possibly that a builder offered a homeowner a certain shell, an exterior, and a choice of 6 different customizable interior floor plans. So the second house type within the minimal traditional phase is a side gabled minimal traditional. And this is a 1-story house and really transitional. I've placed it in minimal traditional era, sort of, but it's starting to look like a ranch. It's a little wider than it is deep. The room configuration is starting to appear more ranch-like than any other house we've seen before. However, many of these are still on alley access and have detached garages. Or the third house type within the minimal traditional phase is a front gabled minimal traditional. And again, another transitional piece, this house is deeper than it is wide. Looking back to our bungalow plan, it has private rooms on one side and public rooms on the other. So those 2 last houses are transitioning on either ends of the Cape era.
As West Allis acquired more land, properties also became larger. The third major era of home design, the ranch style, was beginning. Shannon, what defines ranch and its different types?
The ranch is really the first house that embraces driveway from the street and garage, even attaching the garage to the house. Ranch by definition is a single-story structure embracing the landscape and sprawling out over it. There are 3 different kinds of ranch house types in West Allis. The first is, again, another transitional house like we saw in the Cape era. I call it a box ranch, and it is still deeper than it is wide, but really starting to embrace the key ranch floor plan, which I call garage, living, and bedroom. And so you've got a garage component, now very important, more important than it's been in the past. Living, including kitchen and dining, and then the private bedroom, bathroom spaces. The second house type is a standard ranch, and there are 2 variations of this. There's a standard ranch with detached garage and a standard ranch with attached garage. So that first one with the detached garage still has that main plan, garage, living, and bedroom. And the driveway bypasses the kitchen. The kitchen was an important access point to that garage. You didn't schlep your groceries through the bedrooms. So they came through the garage, through the kitchen. That was the public spaces. And then a small hallway to the front bedrooms were children's bedrooms, less private. And the rear bedroom was the master bedroom with more privacy. So a subtype of the standard ranch house is a breezeway ranch, and this takes a standard ranch plan and puts a little transitional entryway sequence or connection between garage and kitchen into the house. And although there are few in West Allis, in this sort of climate, it's really an interesting addition to not, instead of having your garage detached but maybe not quite attached, you've got this little climate controlled area you can walk through.
Also falling into the ranch era are colonials and split levels.
So there are a few other housing types that fall into the ranch category or ranch era. They are not by definition ranch. The one is maybe a modern colonial or 2-story colonial. Most of these are highly customized, sometimes builder or architect designed, and exist primarily in the southwestern neighborhood of Orchard Hills. In addition to those are split level homes. And again, varying floor plans and different combinations of things. Both of these still holding on to the ranch concept of a garage, a group of public spaces separated from a group of private spaces. So it's no longer on the same floor. It's not a 1-story structure anymore, but it still really holds on to that GLB ranch plan concept. tri-levels fall into that split level or split entry type house. Again, highly customized floor plans and very hard to say they have a certain type.
Having an impact on design, floor plan, and property size is the garage. Shannon illustrates how the garage developed over time and its importance.
Originally, the earliest bungalows would have been built as standalone. They wouldn't have had garages necessarily, maybe outbuildings for yard tools and things like that. But bungalows had alley access, and then as you progressed into car culture, probably at least into the 20s and definitely by the 30s, most families had a car, and that's when people started building garages on their back alley to go along with their bungalow homes. As the car culture really started to drive society, that's when you notice the change from alleys into driveway access, that garage sort of moving from the back of the lot, attaching itself to the house. People parked their cars in their driveways, and it was sort of a symbol of prosperity and you know, maybe flaunting your possessions to Mr. and Mrs. Jones. You've got this car sitting in your driveway. Well, in addition to people seeking bigger homes and more space for their family to grow up in backyards, houses became much wider due to that attached garage component. I mean, that really became essential to the three-part floor plan. The garage was a component, and that widened the houses and often doubled or tripled the width of lots now.
Shannon, you think knowing the history of one's home leads to a deeper appreciation and pride in ownership?
I think there's a couple things this is doing to help. People purchasing historic homes are now understanding the background of them, how they were built and why and things like that, and maybe how to take care of them for the future, what changes to make, what modifications are appropriate, and still hold true to the style and the character of the historic elements. Another thing it's helping is the review board. From the city's standpoint, the architectural review board may or may not know what to do with, you know, addition proposals and things like this. And if they have this information and this history, they know how to better guide homeowners and do appropriate changes for their historic homes.
The houses in our city do have a story. So the next time you're out for a walk or driving around, take a closer look at the houses, their styles, their designs. I think you'll see the life and character of what has been built in West Allis.